This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 3. Octavian declared Augustus. Herod had been close to Antony. It was Mark Antony, after all, who crucified and slit the throat of Antigonus. So after Antony's defeat at the Battle of Actium, Herod pledged his loyalty to Octavian, who repaid him by confirming his kingship. From Octavian's point of view, it was better to have a client king as a buffer between Rome and the Parthians, Rome's competitor in the east. And Herod the Great was truly a client of Rome. He could do little of importance without Rome's blessing. But his sister, Salome, was something of a worm tongue, planting rumors and spinning conspiracies to rile up her brother, whom she played incessantly. Over the course of his life, King Herod had at least 10 different wives, including the beautiful Hasmonean princess Mariamne, his second wife. Because of the number of wives and the habit of naming family members after more prominent forebears, tracking his children is often done with complex charts and graphs. But for our purposes, we'll pay attention to the two boys of Mariamne and King Herod, Alexander and Aristobulus. Salome and Mariamne had a bitter rivalry, and Salome planted rumors of an affair on Mariamne's part. Herod heard about this and ordered his wife executed, leaving the toddlers, Alexander and Aristobulus, motherless. Back in Rome, as the bloodshed from the latest civil wars finally subsided, Octavian was declared Augustus, which means revered or honored, by the Senate on January 16th, 27 BCE. He would rule until 14 of the Common Era. Octavian preferred the term princeps civitatis, or first citizen, or princeps senatus, first senator, which included him to claim that he was merely first among equals. But in actuality, it was his policies and length of service that truly disengaged Rome from its republican moorings and initiated the age of the Roman Empire. Octavian dedicated himself to improving the administration of the empire, reforming the army, and building projects in Rome, among many other notable achievements. Of Rome, Octavian said he found a city of sun-dried brick and left it a city of marble. One of his first and most prominent projects was his own mausoleum, begun in 28 BCE. It was the largest circular tomb in the known world, measuring 87 meters in diameter. A portico on the south end was its entrance. Urns for the ashes of Augustus's family were reverently kept inside. And of course, the mausoleum was not the only major building project upon which Octavian embarked. He was greatly assisted in his building efforts by Marcus Agrippa, who constructed aqueducts, temples, baths, and more, not only in Rome, but throughout the empire. One of Agrippa's longest-lasting monuments, and his name is still seen on it today, was a Pantheon, constructed in 25 BCE. He intended to dedicate it to Augustus, but Augustus refused. The Pantheon was about 2,500 feet due south from the mausoleum of Augustus, and it was architecturally reminiscent of it. The monuments faced each other, and in a sense mirrored each other. Whereas Augustus built a mausoleum for his relatives, Agrippa's temple was to all the gods, thus the name Pantheon. Agrippa wanted to place a statue of Octavian in the Pantheon, but the princeps declined. Instead, Agrippa placed a statue of Julius Caesar in the Pantheon, while statues of Octavian and Agrippa stood in the portico. This was effective propaganda, showing that Julius Caesar was divine, and Octavian and Marcus Agrippa were as close to the divine as you could be. Agrippa's beneficence to and around Rome seemed to know no bounds. In addition to the Pantheon, and in honor of his naval victories, Agrippa also constructed the Basilica of Neptune and, in 20 BCE, public baths. These three buildings, the Pantheon, the Basilica of Neptune, and the Baths of Agrippa, were near one another in the Campus Martius, on land owned by Agrippa himself. The baths of Agrippa came into full use only after the completion of the aqueduct Aqua Virgo in 19 BCE, built and paid for also by Agrippa. The Aqua Virgo remains in use even today as its waters supply the Trevi Fountain, complemented by the Aqua Julia, which Agrippa also built in 33 BCE. Marcus Agrippa had become a powerful statesman and an accomplished architect, as close as one could be to the divine. There's one story from this period that demonstrates Octavian, now known as Augustus's, sensibilities, and which will be important for understanding how he dealt with uncomfortable situations. One particularly wealthy, extravagant, and cruel equestrian, Publius Vettius Pollio, was perhaps the template for modern-day James Bond villains, as he kept a reservoir with man-eating lampreys trained for just such a task. Pollio had a reputation for tossing slaves into this reservoir of doom for mistakes or for what he considered bad behavior worthy of capital punishment. He took a sadistic delight in watching the slaves being eaten alive. He also thought it was opportune and efficient that he would later dine on a lamprey or two that had been fed in this way. He considered Augustus a friend, and the princeps had even appointed him governor in the province of Asia around 31 BCE, which was a true honor for an equestrian. Once, when he was entertaining Augustus, Pollio's cupbearer accidentally broke a crystal goblet, and Pollio ordered him to be thrown to the lampreys. Crystal goblets were some of his most expensive pieces, certainly worth more to him than the slave. But immediately the slave fell on his knees before Augustus and begged him to intervene. Augustus tried to persuade Pollio not to commit such a monstrous deed. Certainly the slave was not worthy of death, and definitely not death by man-eating lampreys. But Pollio disregarded these entreaties from his guest. Before the slave could be dismissed, Augustus said, "Bring all the rest of these expensive drinking vessels out. They sound impressive. I'd like to see them, admire them, and even use them." Pollio happily obliged, and when they were all set out for Augustus to admire, the princeps ordered them all to be broken as the first one had been. Pollio was incensed. No longer was he angry over one goblet being smashed, but all of his most favored and pricey cups were now destroyed. Yet he knew that he could not punish the servant for a minor offense compared to what Augustus had just done. So he relented, very much against his will. The dinner demonstrated to Augustus how egotistical and cruel Pollio really was. Even more, Pollio flouted his wealth in gaudy ways, something Augustus considered deplorable. Now, due to King Herod's familiarity with Octavian and the Roman elite, some of Herod's children, including Alexander and Aristobulus, sons of the executed Mariamne, were sent to be educated in Rome from about the age of 12 in 23 BCE. In Jerusalem, about that same year, Herod built a new palace at the highest point in the city. There were banquet halls, more than 100 guest rooms, courtyards, pools, and more. Not long after, he noted that the temple now appeared to be diminished when compared to his new building projects. So he committed in 20 BCE to rebuild and repair the temple in Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, whose size he doubled. The housing facade for the Holy of Holies would now be covered in gold, gleaming in the sun. When finished, the temple complex would be 140,000 square meters, the largest temple in the ancient world. Herod also constructed a number of aqueducts, and he improved an ancient port city on the coast of the Mediterranean, or what the Romans called Mare Nostrum, our sea. King Herod ensured the port was deeper and the city was protected by a new wall. There, he even constructed an amphitheater, theater, and an aqueduct. Because Herod had been nominated to be king by both Octavian and Mark Antony and then confirmed by the Senate in 40 BC, in a show of gratitude, he renamed the city Caesarea after Octavian, and it came to be known as Caesarea Maritima. Back in Rome, because Livia and Octavian had no children of their own, and Octavian had only one biological child, his daughter Julia, he ensured that she was taught how to spin and weave, which were respectable, traditional, and usual skills expected of Roman women. He also encouraged her love of literature, but he restricted her visitors only to those whom he had vetted and approved. Livia continued to push her own two boys forward as would-be heirs, but Octavian seemed to prefer Marcus Agrippa as heir, for in 21 BCE he gave him his 18-year-old daughter Julia in marriage, even though she was nearly 25 years younger than Marcus Agrippa. So Agrippa divorced his second wife and married Julia. This would be her second marriage, as her first husband, to whom she was married when she was only 14, died. The following year, Tiberius and Vipsania, betrothed to each other as children, were married. She was 17 years old, and Tiberius was 23. Fortunately, it was a happy marriage, and the two seemed to really love each other, which was not guaranteed in arranged marriages in ancient Rome. And eventually in 14 BCE, they had a son, Drusus. But in a further sign that Marcus Agrippa was being set up for possible succession, Augustus directed him to the eastern part of the empire. In 16 BCE, Marcus Agrippa, together with Julia, his wife, and their young family, traveled throughout the east and even visited Herod the Great in Jerusalem, cementing that relationship on behalf of Rome and securing Herod's alliance. Sacrifices were made in the temple Jerusalem on behalf of Augustus and Livia. Augustus saw and admired the temple renovations that Herod the Great had begun only a few years earlier, though the renovations would not be complete until many decades later, in the early 60s CE. Now in 15 BCE, Pollio, the primordial James Bond villain with the man-eating lampreys, died, and he left to Augustus a good share of his estate, together with his summer home between Neapolis and Puteoli, on the Posillipo Hill, with stunning views of the azure waters of the Bay of Naples. He called his estate the Pausilipon, which is a Greek term meaning rest from worries. Pollio's will decreed that some public work of great beauty should be erected at his estate in Rome, so Augustus had it razed to the ground on the pretext of preparing for the erection of the other structure, but really with the purpose that Pollio should have no monument in the city. Instead, the princeps would eventually build a colonnade, inscribing on it the name not of Pollio, but of his wife Livia. As for the Pausilipon near Puteoli, over the years Augustus expanded it and used it as a place for relaxation and contemplation. It had a theater, a swimming pool, including a maritime grotto, and a panoramic terrace.